Good morning, everybody. We're waiting for a few more people to join us from the waiting room, so we'll get started here in just a minute. Good to see you all. I'm glad you're able to make it on a November morning. I know there's a lot going on your campuses right now, so appreciate you taking the time. Just a couple more people. We just noted this morning, for whatever reason, Zoom is very slow at letting people in. I don't know what's going on with them, but it just seems like it's taken a little bit longer to get people's audios and videos set up once they join a meeting. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. We are at 10 o'clock, a little after, and want to make sure that we have the bulk of the time to be able to spend with our two guests that are joining us today. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Melissa Sadorf. I am the Executive Director for the Arizona Rural Schools Association, and I'm just so pleased that you're able to spend some time with us this morning. Also in attendance is Diane Smith, our policy expert consultant who works with us. And we have two fantastic guests that are going to be providing some very good information for us. Very appreciative that they're here to join us and spend some time with us as well. First, we have Shannon from the State Board of Education, and then Danny Adelman, who is coming to us from the Arizona Center for Law in the Public Interest. And so we're going to kick it off this morning, and I'm not going to talk a whole lot so that they can. But Shannon, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to kick us off with some information about the student advisory. So Shannon, good morning and welcome.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. So hi, everyone. My name is Shannon. I presented a couple months ago to you all. I'm back again. I like to talk about fun things that are about students. That's a big part of my work here for the board. So I'm our project director of constituent services, which means I wear a lot of weird, funny colored hats. But one that I get to wear is I get to run our Student of the Month program. Let's see if my presentation will move the way I want it to. So we started this back in October of 2023, and each month the board recognizes two K through 12 students from across Arizona. The form is currently open to nominate students, so that's kind of what I'm here to speak to you all about. But when a student is selected as Student of the Month, them and their families are invited to attend a board meeting, whether that's in person if they can be here in person with us, or we've had some students join virtually as well if they live further away. The student gets to speak to the board, they receive a plaque, we take pictures. It's just a really fun celebration of their accomplishments, their interests, where they're going in the future. That's part of what they get to talk to the board about. So it's just been a really fun highlight, both for our board members and for audience. We've gotten really great feedback about it. Our board members have told our executive director that if we stop the Student of the Month program, he won't have a job anymore. So it's really been a big win for everyone. But we do accept nominations in a whole slew of categories. There really should be any reason to nominate a kid, whether that's their just character and the way they interact with others, their any particular achievements, whether that's academics or in sports or arts, whatever that you might be achieving. If they're just making a great impact on your school campus, if they're civically engaged, they are running a business. We like to recognize kids in all areas. It's super fun for us. So this is our program data. So I've been tracking since we started back in October, the school type that students come from as that they're coming from. So we have mostly district students that have been recognized, a good chunk of charter schools, and then we've kind of sprinkled in that are on ESA that might be being homeschooled or in a private school. And our goal is to try and hit by about this time, like to be have a kid recognized from every county. So far we've got quite a few of them. Obviously, Maricopa is our biggest because we've got the there, but we do try and pull, especially from our small, more rural counties that are maybe not always getting recognized. We know their students are doing that we want to try and pull them in, which is probably why I get to talk to you all. So this is so far this year, we are in district 38% charter and 13% homeschool, and this is just August through December. And so far we've hit Green, Mojave, Navajo, Yavapai, and Yuma counties. So we got some smaller ones so far, which I've been really excited about. But part of why I'm here to speak to you all is right or no nominations all of these counties. So Apache, Cochise, Coconino, Gila, Graham, and La Paz. So if you are in any of those counties, please consider this your personal to nominate some of your great students. It's really important for our board. We want to make sure we're recognizing students from across the state, making sure that schools and districts and students feel that the board is representative and is there for all across the state of Arizona. So how to actually nominate our student. This QR code is active and takes you to the It's also linked on our webpage where we spotlight all the students we've recognized. So we've got a blurb about each student, pictures from the event, and then we have a YouTube link directly to where they get to speak. A lot of them are talking about their future interests and endeavors, where they want to go to college, what so we link to that in our board meetings as well. And the link to nominate students is right above those different student profiles. And then just a couple things to keep in mind as you're considering writing a nomination. We do select students based on the information of that nomination. If you tell me a kid is really great, but you don't tell me why they're really great, it's a lot harder to pick them. Thoroughness of your nomination is super helpful because we also use that to select students as well as introduce them at our board meetings. So I give our director some about the student and I pull those from that nomination to say their principal just couldn't stop talking about the great impact they have on their school, whatever is true for that kiddo. It also feeds into that description that we post on our website. So the content of the nomination is definitely spending a little bit of time on and working on as well. But with that, does anyone have any questions? Need anything answered? I've included my contact information if anything comes up later as well. But yeah, any questions?
Any questions for Shannon?
I have a question for Shannon. I don't know if you have 5 minutes again next week on Tuesday, but we're doing our collaborative leadership series for single site. And you might get some of those other counties in that meeting. So if you
Absolutely.
can share this information, I will follow up with you in an email afterwards. But
Please do. Like I said,
okay.
I love getting to talk about this. It's a super fun what I get to bring to meetings. So absolutely so happy to meet with them. And we accept nominations from all counties. I'm pulling kids from all over the place. There's just a couple of spotlight counties that I don't have nominations, and in order to get every county by next year, I got to start pulling on some strings there.
Okay, I will follow up with you after this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristen.
Anyone else? Well, Shannon, thanks for taking the time to join us, and I'm looking forward to seeing some rural students recognized at some of those future board
Absolutely.
meetings.
Really excited. What our Greenlee student is coming up in December, and she's a fourth grade student. I think she gets to come in person, and there's going to be a lot of cute smiles and ahs and sighs for her. So I'm really excited.
Awesome.
Thank you for recognizing that. I am Catalina's superintendent, and we are super excited for her to be recognized.
Oh, yeah. I'm so excited.
Yes, yes. She did not know that she was being put in, and I went to the office, and they told me I will also say she's near and dear to my heart because she's also one of my relatives. So
Oh,
it was
that's
just
so fun.
coincidental happen, but she is very excited. So thank you for doing that for students.
Good. We're so excited to have her.
All right.
Join. I'm going to jump off. If anyone has questions later, I shared my presentation with Melissa. So feel free to reach out. I'm happy to chat about it and talk about any students you want to nominate or how the process works. But yeah, thank you all so much.
Thanks, Shannon. All right, Danny, we're going to turn it over to you to really take the reins here on the majority of the meeting and talk us through what's going on with the Glendale Elementary School District versus state of Arizona. Most of us are familiar with what's going on there, but he's going to give us a little bit of background information and then discuss some of the progress that's been made on the suit since it's been filed. There's some things that took place in May and June. Some of you as ARSA members were involved with that. So thank you for being representatives of rural. And then the final steps in the case, which is going to wrap up in the next few months. So Danny, I'm going to turn it over to you and give you the bulk of the time to walk us through what's going on and then take questions throughout, if that's okay, or if you haven't put them in the chat.
Okay. Well, first, I will tell you what I told Melissa earlier today. Last 7 years, I have been leading the case against the state of Arizona for its failure to adequately fund the capital needs of public schools. And I have interacted many officials, superintendents, business officials, teachers. And I've just been so impressed with the people that I've been able to know and to work with. It is just, it's just an honor for me to be able to talk to you. It's like, I just think that if you took any other industry or business or anything else and said, hey, we're going to funding by 80% now, go and, do just as good a job as you ever did. People would throw and laugh. And what you all are able to do with the resources you have is amazing to me. So thanks for letting me be here. So I'm talking about what most people call the capital case. Its real name is Glendale versus State of Arizona. And it really is Glendale et al. So it's Dale L and Crane Elementary and Chino Valley and Elfrida. So it is kind of a medium size, a very small Elfrida, a district that does have the ability to both Crane and Glendale have been able to bond, but in very low amounts. And districts that haven't been able to bond, like Chino and Elfrida. We also represent the Arizona School Association, the AEA, and the Arizona School Administrators. That weird case where you have management and labor all in one case. And, to me, that's always spoken to how much capital funding has been cut. So I was talking to or exchanging communications with Melissa about whether it would be best to talk about this like using a whole PowerPoint and stuff, or to just kind of talk more informally about it and hope that you'll interrupt with questions at any point or put things in the chat. And Melissa thought the latter was a better way to go instead of using the PowerPoint. So let me do that. It's helpful for me to give a little bit of background. So the Arizona Center for Law and the Public Interest, which I'm the director of, has been around for 50 years. For more than 30 years, one of our big focuses has been on school funding and equity. And 30 years ago, this year, we won a case, Roosevelt versus Bishop. And basically the idea of the case, it also was the same basic premise as this case, that the state is not adequately funding districts' capital needs. So in Arizona, as you guys all know, operational funding is equalized. But at that time, capital funding was not at all. And so a district's ability to have facilities, buses, curriculum, technology, all depended on how much it could raise through bonds and overrides, capital overrides, and how much you can raise with bonds is completely dependent on the tax base in your area and whether people in your area will vote for bonds. So mostly it is districts without a lot of property wealth that are left without the ability to bond, or at least the ability to bond in any significant amount. But there are a few wealthy districts where their voters say no, and that number is increasing right now. But basically, the Supreme Court looked at this whole thing, the Supreme Court of Arizona, and it said, when you have so much reliance on the tax base in your district, and we all know that the difference in wealth between districts is massive, that's your system, it is always going to result in huge disparities. We have a provision in the Arizona Constitution that says it's the state's responsibility to provide a general and uniform system of public education. So is it uniform if the system itself creates disparity? No. And the Supreme Court threw it out and said, legislature, you have to come up with a way to fund the capital needs of public schools that doesn't create disparity and that lets all schools have a nice, safe facility and meet its other capital needs. Seems basic, right? Legislature did not like being told what to do by the Supreme Court. So in around 1996, they came back with this other thing. It was called the ABC legislation, and it nibbled around the edges of the system, but it really didn't fix it. Supreme Court looked at that again. We sued again. Supreme Court looked at it, said, no, this is not sufficient. And so they laid down some more ground rules. And basically they said, and always the state defends by saying it's all the district's fault. So the Supreme Court said a few things. One, it says, Constitution says it's a state responsibility. So this blaming districts is not going to work. This is what's called a non-delegable duty. You can't just say, hey, it's up to the districts to make it work. Two, the state has to define these set of minimum standards that all schools should be able to meet. And then it has to provide sufficient funding that all schools in Arizona can maintain compliance with these minimum standards, which we all call the MAG or the minimum adequacy guidelines. And that the system itself cannot cause disparity. So those were the ground rules that the Supreme Court laid out. That's what it takes to meet the Constitution. So then the legislature took another shot at it, and they developed what was called Students First. But the first round of Students First included something called an opt-out, where districts could say, oh yeah, that sounds great, but we're just going to rely on our own voters to fund our capital needs. So we don't want in your system. Supreme Court threw that out and said, no, we all know what's going to happen if you do that. Districts with money are going to be able to afford good stuff. Districts that have to rely on the state are going to get screwed. And so they said, no, but the rest of Students First seems okay and compliant with the Constitution. And the Supreme Court was getting testy at that time, and it said, you have 60 days to fix this, and if you don't, we're shutting down all schools in Arizona. So the legislature then fixed it and adopted the final version of Students First, and that ended the litigation back in the 90s. So what Students First did is it required the state to go inspect all school districts and all school facilities in the state. If districts had facilities that were non-compliant with the new minimum guidelines, it would fix them. If they needed new space because they were overcrowded, it would build new schools. And it provided something called the building renewal formula, which if you've been around in Arizona school funding for a long time, you know about, but if you've only been around the last 10 years or so, you probably don't know about this. But the building renewal formula provided formula-based money to every school district in Arizona that they could use for their capital needs for their facilities. So if you needed to resurface your roof, this was money that you could use to do it. If you needed new air conditioners because yours were at the end of their useful life, or to remodel or repair a bathroom, not just for cosmetic purposes, but because you need to, you have that money available. You could save it up over a couple years if you needed to, because you knew you had a big roof project coming up. Or you could spend it to maintain facilities. You could use it for playgrounds. You could use it for parking lots. This was all money that was doled out based on square footage of your facilities and the age of your facilities and a couple of minor things. So that was a big part of Students First. And then it required inspections every 5 years by the state. And if there were problems, they would fix them. And then it provided soft capital funding, so money for buses, curriculum, technology, furniture, equipment. So that's what Students First did. And for a little while, it actually worked. And many schools were rebuilt, schools were inspected, lots of new roofs were put on, lots of new air conditioning systems were installed. So then what happened? The legislature just started eating away at it. And they started taking away little parts of Students First. So the group that was supposed to do inspections, they took away most of their funding, so they didn't have the manpower to do inspections. During the recession, Arizona cut more school funding than any other state in the country. And eventually, as you guys know, this whole building renewal formula that I talked about that gave you money to keep your facilities in good shape and fix things was all taken away. First, it was just underfunded. Then it didn't get any funding at all. And then finally, it was repealed. And it was quote unquote replaced with the building renewal grant system that we have today. And I'll talk about why that isn't sufficient and kind of what happened. So when and then the soft capital funding became DAA. And so DAA, like you keep hearing about how all capital funding for Arizona schools was restored. It is complete lies. Although DAA was restored, it was never meant to be all capital funding. It was supposed to just be soft capital funding. That's what you were supposed to get for buses, curriculum, technology. That was never supposed to be enough money for you to keep your facilities in good shape, too. So anyway, by what year was it? By 2016, most districts in Arizona had their DAA, which was just a fraction of what they were supposed to get anyway, cut by 80, 85, even 90%. And we sued again on behalf of all these people in 2017. So we've been doing this case for the last 7 years. COVID caused part of that delay. The state tried to have the case thrown out for a bunch of technical legal reasons. That took a year or two. And then when the Hobbs administration was put in, that also caused a delay of about a year. So all these things together, made the case draw out. But I want to talk about what the case is really all about. So the basic premise of the case is once they started taking away all these different sources of money, we were right back where we started. Meaning, if you have bonds and overrides, you probably have really nice schools. If you don't have bonds and overrides and you need to rely on state funding for all of your capital needs, you don't. And that causes disparity. It's the system itself causing disparity. I'm guessing many of you, your tax base in your communities wouldn't support anywhere near the level of bonds you'd need to keep your facilities in good shape, to replace schools, get new space, to put on a new roof, all those things. And so we sued, and after all this time, so what would happen, and I see Shanna here. And Shanna became a witness, and this happened with many rural superintendents. So we had folks, and I'll go through a little list just so you can hear how some of your colleagues helped us out with this case. But basically, the story was very similar. So in many rural districts, there was no ability to get bonds. Some had tried overrides and failed miserably, or there was the opportunity only to get a minimal bond, which Shanna used to great effect. But for the most part, we would hear stories of failing roofs, failing air conditioning system, failing parking lots, failing bathrooms, failing walls and windows, and an inability to replace space. Portables that the school administration was saying, I wouldn't want my own kids going to school in those portables. All those things. And so as discovery went on, a lot of times what happened was a superintendent would come and testify, and then magically, the thing that they had been trying to get fixed for the last 5 years through the SFB, now the SFD, right after they testified, um, as if the clouds parted, Aho's getting $7 million worth of roofs, and Chino Valley's getting $20 million worth of roofs and air conditioners, and all these things are happening. Either because now it became known, or if you're a more cynical person, because they didn't want this person coming to trial talking about how horrible it was. Now they'd come to trial and they would have to say, yeah, they fixed it. So we just kept adding witnesses because to us, we didn't care why they were doing it. We just thought it was great that these districts were getting new roofs and were getting air conditioning systems. And that's the whole reason we brought this case. So anyway, it ended up with us over time adding a lot of new witnesses. And many were from really the entire gamut of school districts in Arizona. So we had witnesses from Tucson and Chandler and Mesa, the biggest districts in the state. And then we had districts from, Bowie and Elfrida and Blue Ridge, and Mohawk Valley and Ajo and Somerton, and Snowflake and Holbrook. So really all over the state of every size and of every wealth category. So the folks from Chandler would talk about how if they didn't have their $500 million worth of bonds, their facilities would be a mess. Tucson was talking, they hadn't been able to pass a bond in 20 years. They were talking about how they had 500 air conditioning systems out all at the same time. And then they did just pass a $500 million bond. And they were able to talk about what difference that's going to make for them. We had a lot of live witnesses who testified in trial. We got to trial this past June. It went late May to late June, the entire month. And then we also had experts from all over the country. So some of you may know Judy Richardson. She worked in school finance in Arizona for many years. She was the first director of the predecessor of the SFB. She worked in the legislature trying to help craft students first. So she was an expert for us. She did it all pro bono. By the way, my firm does everything pro bono. We're a nonprofit law firm. And then we had national experts from around the country that talked about why facilities matter, why money matters to schools, why it's unfair to rely on local tax bases, the things that can influence whether bonds pass, which can be everything from politics to poverty, to I hate public schools, to who knows, but none of them have anything to do with how bad the need is, right? So those kinds of experts. And then we also put on a lot of deposition testimony. We only had a limited amount of time in trial. So basically, in a month-long trial, you each get 2 weeks. So we also had many witnesses like Shanna who testified in deposition. We were able to use that deposition testimony as well as the live testimony. And then we had about 500,000 pages of exhibits. It was an enormous undertaking. We had people, so, so let's see, I mentioned Aho, Somerton, Quartzsite, Mohawk, and then Levine, Tucson, Glendale, Chino, Peoria, all over, really. And so then we had the trial. And it was interesting to us, like some of the very best evidence in the case came from the state's witnesses and the state's documents. If you guys have tried to get any of your building renewal grant projects through and have been told, well, yeah, we'll approve it, but we don't have any money. That is a huge part of what the case was about. Remember, the Supreme Court said you have to have a sufficient system that enables all districts to maintain compliance with minimum standards. Well, minimum standards include roofs that are watertight and walls and windows that are watertight. Minimum standards include plumbing that works, electrical that works, air conditioning systems that work. And when the state itself acknowledges, yeah, there's all these problems at districts throughout Arizona, we just don't have the money to fix them. I mean, to us, it's the definition of what the Supreme Court said is not allowable. So, I mean, a lot of our evidence was that, and then a lot of our evidence focused on disparity. If you look at what districts without bonds are able to spend on capital and you compare it to what districts that have bonds are able to, it's about 300% difference. And in some, it is more than 1,000% difference. So we would show the court, and I don't know if some of you may know Annabelle Apartella, who works with ASBA and other groups. She was able to do a lot of evidence showing. So we could compare right in front of the judge. You could pick any two districts. So we could take Madison, which has essentially unlimited bonds. And then we could take Isaac, which is not that far away and has no bonds. And you could see in a graphic format the difference. But basically, it came down to about 300+% what districts with bonds versus those without were able to spend. So what was the defense? You'll be shocked to know the defense was districts are being dumb with their money. And so again, it is not that the state isn't giving sufficient money, it's that districts are choosing to spend their discretionary money they receive from the state, which never was defined, right? Like, what's discretionary mean? If you pay your teachers, the state isn't telling you how much to pay your teachers. So if you give your teachers a raise, is that discretionary money? Well, the state says it is. So they would say, you're here in court complaining that you can't put a roof on, but you just gave your teachers a 20% raise over 5 years. How can you do that? Or if you have full day K is not required by the state. If you have full day K, you're spending your discretionary money educating kids, idiots, where you could be spending your discretionary money putting a new air conditioning system in your school. So that was a huge part, the biggest part of the defense. They also had experts to come in and say money really doesn't matter for educating kids. And they would have their experts do these studies where they would show, hey, this district's spending $5,000 a kid, this district's spending $9,000 a kid, and they're both getting the same test scores. So it's not money that matters to whether you can educate kids. It's other stuff like having good administration or good teachers. And we never denied that good teachers matter and that good administration matters. But all of that is easier if you have money. Like it's so unfair that we had a witness, we had some of the haves come and testify. So Jeremy Caius from Tolleson Union, they can pass as many bonds as they want. He came and said what they were able to pay their teachers because they could use bond money for all their capital needs, transfer DAA over to their operational spending, and pay teachers up to $100,000 a piece. Try to compete with that when you got half of that or less. So we tried to explain why the system itself causes disparity. The defense also put on witnesses from the SFB and SFD. A fun fact, the state did not call a single witness from any school district. Not ones with bonds, not ones without bonds, not rural, not urban, none. And the people that they put on from the SFB, like the defense was trying to get them to say these guys just don't take care of their facilities. It never worked. The people from the SFB, there were the occasional, yeah, I've tried to meet with this guy to take care of their roof issue, or, they're not responding as quickly as they should to my BRG, automatic emails or whatever. But for the most part, they said districts are doing the best they can with the limited resources they have available. And then they had experts that tried to kind of jump on the districts just aren't being smart with their money. So the trial took 4 weeks. This is a very different trial than what we're all used to seeing and what I'm used to doing. So usually at the end of the trial, jury deliberates. They tell you who won and who lost. So, June 30th, we would have all found out the answer to this. This was a trial to the court. So just the judge, and the judge alone will decide. And what that meant was there were so many depositions in this case and so many exhibits that each side does essentially a closing argument and their version of what the court should rule. So that all takes time. So we had 60 days to do ours. Then the defense has 60 days. Then we have 45 days from that. The defense just called us and asked for an extension. So we turned ours in the beginning of October. It was a closing argument that was about 50 pages long, and then what are called proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law that were over 350 pages long, with 1,400 separate paragraphs. Shanna, probably your district accounted for about 40 paragraphs of what happened in Mohawk Valley and how long it took you to be able to fix it and how the system impaired that and how a bond, even a small one, was necessary to help you. But basically that's how it went. So each district that appeared in the case, we would try to explain how the system caused the problems that they were having or how bonds prevented them from having those same kinds of problems. So now the state has till December 20th to do their response. And then we will get till about February 17th to do our what's called rebuttal. Then the case will be in the court's hands. The judge has, by rule, 60 days to rule from the time we submit this last thing. And so that's where it is. Now, 60 days is a rule, so they're supposed to do that. But I will tell you, having done this for a long time, sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. But we're expecting in kind of mid-spring that we will get a ruling in this case. What we are asking for is for the judge to say essentially what they said in 1994, that the system is unconstitutional because it is not general and uniform. And that the districts are not given sufficient money to ensure that they can always meet the minimum guidelines. And the state is trying to get a ruling that says we haven't proved there's a problem. And that's about it. I mean, I definitely want to answer questions if anybody has any. And I also want to just thank you guys for caring about this, your colleagues. And if something comes up where you just think we ought to know, just know that we're a resource for you. Like I said, everything we do is pro bono. I'll put my email in the chat if I can figure out how to do that.
Well, Danny, while you're doing that, I have a question for you. There's right now some efforts to update the mags. And how does that play into this case? Because
Sure.
they're changing kind of the target at the same time that rulings are happening.
Yep. So a few things on that. One, part of the reason they're doing that is because of the case. So part of our case, one of the fun things about the case has been they actually have fixed some stuff. In our view, not because they really care, but because they wanted to take away certain of our arguments to be able to do. But like I said before, we don't care why they fix it. We just want them to fix it. One of the things was the failure to do inspections. That was one of the claims in the case. And one of the claims in the case was that the guidelines themselves are so out of date that they no longer include everything you need for a good school. So one of the big things that did change is the technology, adopting a 1-to-1 instead of a 1-to-8. That was good, and we felt like, we appreciated that. They gave you no extra money to meet that guideline, though. So whatever, it coincided with COVID funding. So many districts were able to meet that 1-to-1 and needed to because of the ESSER money. That's gone. Lots of our witnesses talked about how they worry what's going to happen when those things all need to be replaced. Anyway, part of the problem with the guidelines is there was virtually nothing for security. We had people from urban and rural districts talking about just how much it sucked that there were no modern guidelines for security. And so what happens is districts with bond money have put in all those things, and districts without haven't. So anyway, yeah, they're doing the MAG committee. We have worries that the committee has been told to worry a lot about costs. And so is it really like there is this fine line that the committee has had to tightrope? Are they really doing what is necessary for a good school? Or are they dumbing it down because they know the state won't pay for things if they add more? And I think, we'll all have to see. I know their final report was just done. We'll see what comes next. Yeah, they were just submitted, as Shannon pointed out. So we have been trying to meet with people and suggest changes, sort of behind the scenes. Some of those have been made. Um, but I'll be really curious. And if any of you have thoughts on those that you want to share with me, like I said, I put my email in the chat, and you guys should just feel free to reach out to me. There are many things I would not be able to help with. But if you're having problems, it may help us with the case, but I may be able to suggest something. And like I said, you don't need to worry about getting a bill. Everything we do is pro bono. So if you ever feel like there's something you want to share with me or ask me, feel free. Um, and yeah, I mean, so that's what's going on with the MAG. My hope is that if they do appear insufficient, that people will talk about what else should be included. And then I also think the state really needs to be explicit. Is this an unfunded mandate? So now they change the minimum guidelines. Does that mean that you guys now have to do something? Or does it mean that you now can do a BRG request? Because if it's not in the guidelines, the state can't fix it. So I feel like there's this two-sided message that the committee was getting. On one hand, being told, be careful, we don't want to put in a bunch of unfunded mandates. But the flip side of that is rich districts already do all that stuff, right? If you have bonds, you're not waiting to see whether they put key fobs, or automatic locking doors or single points of entry in the guidelines. They've already got all that stuff. And so what happens is if it's not in the guidelines and you want it for your districts, you can't go to the SFB or SFD and say, put this in for me. I have a guidelines deficiency. So if they just recommend it, but don't put it in the guidelines, in my view, it's the have-nots that get screwed by that. The haves are going to do it anyway. So anyway, that's my soapbox on that.
Peter.
Yeah, Danny, thank you. My name is Peter Dwyer. I'm the superintendent at Red Rock Elementary, a small rural school. We've talked about, even within this group, the rural mag lines, and we had the director from SFD on. Callie took a lot of time with us, and it was a great presentation. But the struggle is, so was brought up fencing. Okay, so single point fencing. Who can afford the cost of a chain link fence right now? I mean, so the concern is we get the mag lines, or we get the mag guides, and we get this out, and then what happens if we have an incident and we're not up to mag codes? And I mean, it's opened up Pandora's box for us, in the fact that what can we afford if you're going to give us a guideline? And the question was asked, is this going to be funded? And of course, nobody can answer that question. But it's unsettling, because we were being asked to do these things, and we have the updates. And I have fought SFD for 10 years. My school was built on expansive volcanic soil. I have enormous problems on my campus, and it's I'm a legacy project at SFD. Has been a problem from them, but I've gotten some work done and fought and gotten some money out of them. But it's been difficult. But we go through these mag guidelines, and we're struggling with, where's the responsibility lie now? You're telling me I have to do all this, but I can't fund it. And now, if something happens, the state can say, well, we had it in the guidelines. Why didn't you take care of it?
Yeah. This is why I think that, I think that districts, to the extent there's the opportunity for comment, I think districts need to get out there and say exactly what you just said. Like, this is great that you're making the guidelines modern, but if you're not going to give us the funds, how does that help my kids? How does it help my teachers? How does it help me? If you have to take money out of your operational funding that you need for operations because you want to put in a fence to adhere to the guidelines because the state won't do it, that exacerbates disparity. It doesn't help cure disparity.
Right.
And to get that out there and say it out loud, so that they know what they're voting on, and so they can be clear, right? Like one of the big things, and I know Callie spent time with you, and I'd love to hear if she gave you a clear answer to this. But if the question is, if you put it in the guidelines, are you going to pay for it? If I do a BRG request, and where are you going to get the money to do that? They're $150 million underwater right now. It's November. Um, so they have $50 million left in the BRG fund for the entire rest of the year. If they put these in the guidelines and they're adopted, I mean, somewhere somebody needs to say all this stuff out loud so it just doesn't continue to be yeah, it's a real issue. Um, as far as the liability side of it goes, um, I mean, this is not a subject of the case, right? But I used to do that kind of work. And generally, you have an obligation to act reasonably. And if you don't have a fence around your campus and somebody does something, they're going to say, they being the lawyer representing of whoever got hurt, is going to say you should have done it because reasonable care required you to do it. Whether it's in the guideline or not in the guideline, it's a factor. It's not the whole thing. I mean, I always encourage people to think not as much, and this is easy for me to say because I'm not running a district, um, not to think as much about the liability if a kid gets hurt as trying to prevent a kid from getting hurt. If you're doing all you can with the resources you have available to keep kids from getting hurt, I mean, that is the defense. Now, whether the state should be on the hook, I have a lot of colleagues that would love to be able to fight that fight with us, but I just hope the kids don't get hurt. Yeah.
Tom, go ahead. Oh, you're not muted. You're muted still. Let's see if I can. Kristen, there you go.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Many years ago, Gary Knox and Crane Schools and other superintendents sued the state over the equalization process, the funding, and Yuma County got a lot of new schools, many new schools, and then was it the legislature managed to figure it out, and we're back in the same shape we were 40 years ago? Is that what happened?
Yeah, it's a lot of what happened. It's a little different. So if you go back 30 years, yes, that's what happened. If you go back 40 years, there was a time when operational funding was not equalized. Once they equalized operational funding, and this doesn't include overrides, which I know is very disparate depending on the wealth and politics in your community. But operational funding was equalized. So like when our experts would come to trial and they would talk about how Arizona is 49th or 50th or 51st, depending on what the exact metric was, the one thing we weren't the worst on was operational funding equity. Like that was the one thing that actually got done in the mid 80s. And it changed a lot of things. But capital funding equalization, the building renewal formula was the vehicle to equalize capital funding. And they took that away.
Yeah.
So.
Because remember St. Joe's and Springerville had that power plant. St. Joe's had a power plant.
Yep.
These schools had tens of millions of dollars to spend on their little schools. And when that equalization came, they were going to equalize that money so the poor schools would be able to afford to build their buildings up. And it happened for a while. And then it seems like we're back where we were.
In a lot of ways, we are. I mean, part of what the evidence was that we were putting on at trial is you take a district like Tolleson Union, and they have a poor community. But they have all this industrial property.
Exactly.
So they have the Cardinal Stadium and they have this whole warehouse district along I-10. And because of that, that's the bulk of the wealth, of the property wealth in their community. But that's not the bulk of the voters, right? The voters are the people who live there. So the voters can pass a big bond and pay next to nothing. And like our expert said, the easiest tax to pass is a tax on somebody else.
But see, we're back where
Um,
we were.
yeah,
We're back right where we were with Springerville and St. and Joseph City and those other small schools. We're back there again. If you have the industrial tax base, you can vote in any way you want. It costs you $20 a year.
yeah. I mean, what I worry about now, I mean, I will always worry about the have-nots, the people that just don't have the wealth in the district. It doesn't matter how willing your voters are. If you don't have the wealth in your district, you're capped at what you can pass, even if you want to, or even if your voters want to. But I also worry now this has become such a political thing. Like it used to be, there were red areas of the state that still passed bonds really reliably. And now that is happening a lot less. And districts that historically have been able to pass bonds are not able to pass bonds. And there's all these organized anti-bond groups out there. And it's a real worry. Because I mean, it's bad enough if the state just had to figure out how to come up with the money for the have-nots. If the state also now has to come up with the money for the haves, I just think history tells us who's going to get screwed the most in that system. And it's not going to be the rich areas.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, we're in a lot of ways, and that's exactly what we said when we filed this case in 2017, that we're back to where we were before Roosevelt, before 1994.
Yeah.
Including, Danny, give them the figure. We spent about $1 billion back then on the deficiency corrections. Let them know how much it would be now if we did basically a deficiency corrections again.
Well, nobody really knows the answer to that. We know it's going to be a big, big number. I personally think that if they put $1.5 billion in, plus what they're spending now over the next 2 or 3 years, they could solve a lot of the problems. They could do that without a tax increase. Like there is a way to solve this. There is no political will to solve this. Why it's okay to spend $1 billion on a voucher program for a small percentage of kids, but it's not okay to come up with 3 or 4 or 500 million dollars for public schools that educate the vast majority of our kids. That's not an economic reason. It's a political reason.
Mhm.
And I just think that it's getting the word out there, which I know is incredibly hard for you guys. Your website has to say we give a great education for our kids. It can't say our schools suck because the state won't give us money. And I get that. And the state tried to use that. Shannon, I can't remember if, yeah. So every superintendent, they would go, hey, it says on your website that you have an awesome school. What are you doing here saying that your roof leaks? And, the districts would have to explain why they say that.
Well, Danny, I want to thank you for spending some time with us this morning. I know that this has been valuable information for our membership, and I appreciate you extending the conversation if they have other questions or things that they want to get in touch with you about. So appreciate you and thank you for really speaking out on behalf of rural schools across our state and making sure that rural was elevated.
Yeah.
Can I ask one question quick before we end? So I was in a bond committee meeting in the city. What is the average cost to build like an elementary school or a high school now? It blew my mind, and they were like, no, this is what it costs, but I would like to hear it from you as well.
So it really depends on where it is. But there was a lot of testimony that it's about $100 a square foot more than what the formula is almost everywhere. So I can't remember if the formula now was like 220 a square foot or something like that, that it was 350 and up, is what districts, what were you hearing?
Well, no, and for the formula, does that include any exterior spaces like
No.
fields or anything like that?
So it is supposed to include 2 hardscapes for a basketball court, and some kind of field, but without any landscaping or something like that. It's really bad.
So,
Um,
so what I heard was that for a high school of about, let's say around 2,000 students, so maybe a little bit bigger, but to take it from bare dirt to get all the fields in and everything was around 175 million. I don't know. It was really scary to hear that.
I have not heard that number. Um, Basically, what we were hearing had to do more with the total cost of a project rather than just the cost to bring you from dirt to a decent athletic facility. Um,
No, that was a full campus
oh, it
with,
was. Okay,
yeah,
I
a
was
full
gonna say, but if
campus.
you're
No,
being
full
told
campus.
175 million for
No,
that,
full campus. That was
let
for
me
a high
send you to
school. So
somebody else, 'cause that seems high.
it was the gym, the practice gym, the fields, the performing arts center, the all the stuff that high schools have. It was about 175 million for everything. But that wasn't,
And do you know how that compares to the formula? Were they saying how much of that?
well, I know they were trying to get a bond so that they could build it because
Yeah,
the SFD money was not even coming close to
right.
covering it. So,
Yeah. What we heard really consistently was that the SFB money pays for about half of what you need um, to build a school. Um, and I don't know if you had architects involved in your conversations. If you need me to like refer you to other people who I know that have just been through this, let me know.
it wasn't for us. I
Oh,
was
okay.
on somebody else's
Okay.
committee. So,
Yeah. It's crazy. It's crazy how much it has all gone up. And I mean, I hate to leave you on a downer, but all of those high construction costs also affect the SFB projects. So the roof that they put off that would have cost $4 million when they put it off in 2021 is now costing $8 million. And the money that the SFB is getting to take care of needs hasn't gone up in 3 years. And the governor is not seeking, at least from what we're told, a higher amount next year than they got this year. They estimated they had about $580 million worth of needs for fiscal 2025 for SFB projects that they knew about. They got 200 million. They already had more than $200 million in backlog projects from 2024 and 2023 that they haven't funded. So they started out without enough money to even take care of the backlog, not including anything for this entire year. I'm not happy.
On that note,
Listen, I just want to thank you all. I've said this to Shanna many times, but I just could not be more impressed with the work you do for our kids in a mostly thankless job. It is absolutely incredible. In any other field, if they were given the problems that you guys have to navigate, I just don't think it would be possible. So thanks, and thanks for listening, and feel free to reach out to me.
Thanks, Danny. Really appreciate you.
All right.
Everyone, enjoy the upcoming Thanksgiving holidays. Hope that you stay happy, healthy, and well, and we'll see you at our next roundtable. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, all.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Kristen. You can shut it down.